We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program the proprietor and host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, available on iTunes and Stitcher and at the BenjaminDixonShow.com. Benjamin Dixon. Hello, Ben. How
Sam,
are you?
I'm doing great, Sam. Always a pleasure to be here with you all. How's it going over there?
It's going
Up there,
great.
rather.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's just briefly talk about this. I mean, it's sort of, I don't know, maybe on some level, I feel like I'm not doing my job as a polemicist and as a sort of, propagandist in the most sort of value neutral expression. But there have been 12 bombs now sent to Democratic leaders.
Right.
And one guy associated with, and a couple of administrative people like Brennan and Holder.
Right.
I don't know why these bombs didn't go off. I'm not a bomb maker or a bomb diffuser. But they could have, and maybe those people wouldn't have been killed, but it would have been other, people. But the idea of bombs being sent to the top leadership of the opposition party seems a little problematic. And you would imagine that everything would stop, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
they have found the guy. Here's a picture of his van. It is adorned with pictures of Pence and Trump and pictures of Michael Moore with a target on it, Hillary Clinton with a target on it, Jill Stein with a target on it, others. And I mean, and now I don't know, maybe it's all false flag. Maybe when they get in there, it's going to be, I don't know, Tom Perez is going to be, that's his van and whatever, but highly unlikely. Just give me your sense of how underplayed this is. And the idea that Donald Trump, you would think that Donald Trump would call the former president and say, hey, just want you to know we're doing everything we can to protect you.
Yeah. That's one of the most notable things outside of the insanity of bombs being sent itself. I feel like I gave the same disclaimer on my podcast this morning. I mentioned it, but I didn't want to stay there because there's just too many variables there that we don't know, except for the ridiculousness that we're getting from Donald Trump and the conservatives. This perfectly sealed hermetic bubble that they exist in, they have accepted in their minds, even the president. He's floating this idea that it's a false flag. That's clearly a possibility, but to have that spread by the president before the FBI can actually resolve that is the case just shows you just how ridiculous, how far gone we are, to the point where that behavior by Trump is the exact same thing that drives our news cycle, that is just constantly, day after day. We can't even keep up with it. So now that 12 bombs have been sent, or packages that are suspected of being bombs or whatever they are, it's nothing shut down. Nobody's moving any slower. The news is still going just as fast as ever.
But let's talk about this notion of people floating that it's a false flag, right? I think I saw that guy, Brett Weinstein, making some argument about it would be irresponsible, because it's a possibility, the idea of raising this question shouldn't be criticized in some way.
Right.
And
right.
I do not remember a single instance when any of these people, when anybody ever said it was a false, hypothesized that it could be a false flag when we had any other type of the Times Square bombing or any of this other stuff. Because let's be honest here. It is a possibility that it's a false flag in the same way that it's a possibility that it's a false flag of a false flag of a false flag of a false flag of a false flag.
Exactly.
The idea that someone's going to send out 12 bombs and it's some type of Democratic operative, okay?
Right.
And they're going to send this out and not get caught, right? Like they're so good at this that they can send out 12 bomb packages and not get caught, is highly, highly unlikely, it seems to me. Like beyond unlikely. It is almost to the level of absurdness. Now, it's possible you could have a crazy person who sends this, who is like, I'm supportive of all these people, and therefore I'm sending it, and I won't get caught, and they're completely crazy. But it's not really a false flag as much as it is, it's a crazy person who has been driven to do something crazy. And, you know, no doubt this guy has some mental issues if it's a guy who sent these out. But this is like, you know, there are certain, the idea of entertaining this as a false flag, like it's an operation, right? Like there's some is just absurd. And it is, I don't know. To me, that's just, it's absurd.
It's to be expected from certain circles like Dinesh D'Souza. This is par and course. This is how he makes his money, right? To have it coming from the White House. I don't care if Donald Trump is the president. I don't care how ridiculous Donald Trump is. To have that coming from the White House absolutely undermines the entire process, right? And I'm not surprised that Donald Trump is doing this, but we still can't like let that be an excuse for how absurd this is. At some point, we have to grab hold of one of these news cycles and not just be flung around with the madness all day and cling on to the fact that this is happening right before our eyes and it's being spearheaded by the president of the United States. I think one of the reasons we can't make anything stick to Donald Trump is because we're spinning so fast, and he knows that, and he's contributing to that. And I think that's why he floated the false flag notion this morning. And I don't know if it was this morning or last night, but when he floated it, he knows what he's contributing to. He's contributing to the chaos.
Let's listen to this clip from, what's her name? Trish Regan. She is on Fox Business, and she has an interesting take as to what caused this this situation with these bombs, but also sort of like, you know, there's a chyron underneath that the breaking news: U.S. troops are deploying to the border because, Ben, as you know, and I'm sure you know, you are, I believe, down in the Atlanta area, so you are south of us. And I imagine this makes this that much more harrowing for you. But approximately 2,000 miles from you, there are almost 2,500 families with children who
terrifying,
who are obviously looking to take over your home. So, but let's listen to Trish Regan break this down for us.
Night. Plus, new tonight, a nationwide manhunt underway for the suspected mail bomber. We have fresh intel that Florida, Maryland, and New York are key areas of interest. Meanwhile, the media is ratcheting up its attacks on the president, saying these heinous acts are all his fault. The media refusing to take any responsibility for themselves. It's the victim mentality all over again. Geraldo is here, and he is my guest on that.
Geraldo.
Right. Yeah, well, which part of that is the most absurd? The idea that
the Geraldo part, hands down, like he's going to be the expert on this issue. But no, seriously, the entire framing is asinine, Sam. I don't even know what you want to say about that.
Well, I mean, CNN's taking a victim mentality probably because they had 2 bombs sent to them.
I mean, there's that. There's that. Here's the bigger problem that you speak to all the time, and I always like to cast it in this framing, right? This is strategic. This is not an oversight. This is part of the programming. It's not a bug. It's a feature. They know what they're doing. It's the victimizers playing the role of the victim. It's calling the real victims people who are having the victim complex. It's the oppressor trying to maintain power by feigning as though they are the oppressed. And anytime they can find a scapegoat that they can fulfill that victim complex that they are projecting onto us, through. Right now, it's the migrants that are coming north. They execute it flawlessly, and they do so. Here's the biggest problem: they do so through this massive propaganda machine that is funded by billionaires that we don't have anything remotely close to on the left. And that combination makes them successful over and over again. We felt like we had one step forward, I guess, with Obama, but now it really feels like we've taken 10 steps back. That's because we never really took a step forward. We just kind of had an anomaly. But this conservative machine that is able to project this victimhood, this victim complex that they are operating in, they've been doing this masterfully for years. So this is just an extension of that.
There's along those lines, there's a new book out, and I think we're going to have one of the authors on. But it's nothing. It's not huge news to you or I, or probably to most of the people who listen to this program. I mean, certainly there has been advances since 2004 in the early aughts, but a professor at Harvard Law School has written a book, Network Propaganda, Manipulation, Disinformation, and Radicalization in American Politics, basically saying that, if you had removed Rupert Murdoch from the equation 25 years ago, the world would be a much nicer place. And so I guess maybe that's folks' goal. You want to have impact on the world, and if you can't do it, as long as you're a superlative, it doesn't really matter which way it goes. But just to your point about what, as we sort of pivot to look at the elections that are, now about 11 days away, here's a clip of Martha McSally, which I think, and this is taken from, I think they played it on MSNBC, on maybe on Morning Joe, but it's a local news coverage of the Arizona Senate race. Martha McSally is running against Kristen Sinema, not necessarily my favorite candidate of the Democratic field, but it's better than John McCain or Jeff Flake. And but here's Martha McSally. This clip captures the dynamic of what's going on in the country right now in terms of the races. There was a report out by the Wesleyan Media Studies Group that showed that Democrats, paid advertising at least, which is the easiest thing to measure, uses the word or reference to Trump less than any political party has in a midterm election in 15 to 20 years. Wow. And on top of that, they have found that that Republicans are using immigration more than they have in also similar period of time. And here is that that dynamic distilled in a series of quick sound bites from Martha McSally as she's being questioned by a local reporter in Arizona.
Will you fight to retain pre-existing conditions as they are today?
Bram, I have fought for pre-existing conditions. I voted to protect pre-existing conditions.
You voted for something that would weaken pre-existing conditions. You voted for something that would weaken pre-existing conditions.
It's not true. Right now, Bram, it's not true.
And then,
press release comes out on something that's processy, and you guys are asking me about it in this top race in the country. It's just ridiculous.
Well,
can we talk about economic opportunity?
Do you know if any of your staff is getting their health care through the ACA?
Dennis, can we please talk about the things that matter to most voters instead of repeating the Arizona Democrat Party press releases? I mean, this is just
ridiculous. From the party.
It's ridiculous, honestly. Do you have anything to talk about, like the caravan?
There you go. Do you have anything to talk about, like the caravan, the thing that's on people's minds? I mean, it's amazing.
That's staggering. I mean, that she can get away with that. There has to be a new style of journalism, or maybe just to harken back to other ages of journalism, maybe, because you can't let them get away with that. I mean, don't get me wrong. When a politician is intent on weaseling their way out, there's almost nothing that you can do, but you can really expose the fact that they are weaseling their way out. I don't know how the rest of that clip played out, but that attempt to pivot was so transparent that it should have been caught on the fly. And that's really the only way we're going to be able to hold these people accountable. But to the bigger point, I mean, the fact that Republicans are running on the dog whistle and the bullhorn of racism and xenophobia, and the fact that Democrats are timid about attaching this to Donald Trump. I mean, I don't know. Is it possible for them to really be this genuinely incompetent? Sam, I'm asking that question. Help me out here.
Well, all right. Let me address that. Let me address that second. First, okay. I will say, like, these local reporters, they were hounding her about the pre-existing conditions, and I thought they were doing a pretty good job. It's almost that the problem is that we know what she's talking about when she says the caravan. Right? Like the problem has been all of the coverage where people were sending people down to the caravan, because that is, to me, it's the functional equivalent of a meteorology report that is focusing on a rainstorm that is, off the coast of Hawaii, and it may implicate, California. Okay. I mean, it's not, it's so irrelevant. The story really is Donald Trump seems to be focusing on something that's completely irrelevant. And we shouldn't even know. We shouldn't be able to know what she's talking about when she says the caravan. But the second part, I think, I think is, I don't know. I think there are Democrats who are perennially afraid of racializing things. And on some level, that's what's sort of fascinating about what's going on in Florida, to pivot to that, because I think everybody's seen the clip. We certainly played it yesterday. And it's been clip. Really viral, where Andrew Gillum is the Democratic nominee for governor, and he's running against Ron DeSantis. And we should just say, as a backstory, Gillum was not expected to win the Democratic primary. Right. There was, I can't remember her name now. It's been, there's somebody, but he was not expected to win. He had a late surge, and he is the most progressive candidate of that Democratic primary field. He wins. He's African-American, if people have not seen this clip or are not familiar with him. And DeSantis is... there are Republicans like this. Like, in New York, we had that guy, Carl, what was his name? Pavlon, or I can't remember, Palumbo, who, was famous for sending around Obama as a Kenyan faxes, and ran for governor in this state. But DeSantis is like that, but was, people thought he was going to win. And he still may, but it's highly in doubt. And Gillum basically just went right at him for his racism, and said something that I thought was really brilliant. He said, "I'm not calling you racist. I'm just saying the racists seem to think you are." And that's a brilliant construction, I think. Yeah. That it's go ahead.
You don't recognize that, though, do you? It's totally from The Simpsons. Fox News, not racist, but number one with racist. And when I heard him say it, I was like, that is a brilliant use of that meme that's been going around. But I was a little, I was surprised that he went head on into it for the same reason that you outlined in your setup, because, there's a lot of Democrats who are really afraid of doing that.
And I mean, what's also interesting about this race in Florida is that if Gillum wins, he's winning. He was an improbable winner in the primary, and he's running in a way that is embracing a very progressive values in a genuine swing state. This is a state that went for Obama big in 2008, went for Obama not so big in 2012. It more or less flipped by a couple 100,000 votes for Trump versus Clinton. And if Gillum wins in the swing state, he's basically going to drag Bill Nelson across the finish line too, it seems like.
Yes. And that's so critical. Like I'm from Florida. One of the states I'm from is Florida. I lived there through high school and most of college. And I'm just encouraging everyone, if you're going out to vote for Gillum, I think the last poll I saw, he was up by 7 or 8 points.
There's been a couple. I've seen 3, I've seen 9, I've seen 7, but he seems to be up.
he's going to be the one to carry Bill Nelson. So I'm imploring them, please. We don't need Rick Scott of the last person. Like, we don't need any Republican, but Rick Scott, who's thrown $52 million of his own personal money because he's made that money off of Medicare fraud. I mean, for him to be able to go to the Senate would be obscene. But Bill Nelson is in a tough fight there. So you're absolutely right. Gillum would be bringing the more centrist, the more senior establishment Democrat, pulling him over the hurdle, which we absolutely need right now, because the last thing we need is Rick Scott to take a Democratic seat and turn it red.
And the implications, though, of that dynamic, right, where you have someone who is young, African-American, unabashedly progressive, basically carrying this old white guy centrist across the finish line in a genuine swing state, to me, is has huge implications. I mean, there are other races, obviously, we want to win, but this one seems to have like big implications as to what forms the narrative within the Democratic Party as to where you need to go to win.
Yeah. It's critical. I think in a way, it's going to be far more significant than Ocasio-Cortez. Not that we have to make a comparison, but Ocasio-Cortez was kind of like the flashpoint where we realized, wow, there's going to be a new generation of Democratic leadership across the country. But now we're seeing it play out in a very substantive fashion, in a very difficult state, like you said, a swing state, in a race that the first place I ever got called the N-word was Florida. I mean, I'm telling you, North Florida is,
on that.
Yeah, it's an achievement, right? It's North Florida is the South. It is the legitimate South, and that Gillum is able to call out this racism so directly, and I don't think he's gone down on the polls yet. I haven't looked at him this morning. It really speaks to where we have to go. I mean, it's not Nelson. It's not Nelson who's. Put it like this, Joe Biden, who is looking for some type of way for us to get past the incivility, that is not the person and the brand that's going to be able to take us into this next fight.
Yep.
And we're seeing that similarly play out in Florida.
I know that the Republicans are not as afraid of Joe Biden as they pretend to be, because Charlie Kirk told me they were. And I know that I'm quite convinced that.
Can I ask you something? Can
sure.
Does it not frustrate you that a scumbag and moron like Charlie Kirk is even put on the same stage as you? I mentioned this on my show a couple weeks ago, and I was like, I'm going to ask him about it. And you just reminded me for bringing him. I mean, the guy doesn't really know anything. He simply has millions of dollars behind him, which is completely reflective of the thing that we always talk about, media and money. Conservative money in media just making stars. Like, you know, not that it's important, but it frustrated me for you.
I mean, look, I feel like I have a job to do, and I think you certainly more than most people can understand. It's like you have a certain skill set, and I would have liked to have been a better student maybe, and maybe be in a more had or the capacity to have more academic pursuits, but these are the skill sets I have at this point in my life, and if I can go and in any way inhibit the trajectory of any of these people, I am more than happy to do it, frankly. I mean,
well, you did that you did, but it was just the fact that this guy from nowhere gets some millions of dollars from some donors and instantly is inserted into the national conversation for the purposes of propaganda. It's like our life story right now. Like, it's happening over and over again all around the country.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think about it that way. I don't feel like, I don't know who else I would go, be on a stage with. I mean, I think like if they want to do some type of academic debate with good faith people, I think there are people who are better suited for that than I. But I think I'm pretty well suited to go up on stage with somebody who's not a good faith actor, and is and if I mean, that's.
So you're the man. If they're going to put these morons up there, you're the man to take them out.
I sort of feel like that is, for better or for worse, I think I was probably genetically engineered for two things. One, fairly lame sitcoms to play the lead who is put upon. And when that sort of ran its course, then I think this was the next thing for me to do. But all right, well, listen, let me ask you this. Just sticking with Florida for one more minute. The interesting thing, too, about Gillum is, I mean, this is why this race to me is so fascinating, has so much importance. In addition to what we've already said about the narrative that it sets for the Democratic Party, this is also like the ability for Gillum to impact the electorate of Florida is also super huge, right? Like, you know, he's going to have the ability to enfranchise like literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And this to me is huge because so often we see, and we should also say simultaneously, there's an Amendment 4 which would basically, re-enfranchise like 1.5 million voters, for, people who had been convicted of a felony in Florida. And right now, Rick Scott's been doing it, literally handpicking the voters, but Gillum's going to impact that amendment as well. Right. And vice versa. So like turnout's going to be fascinating. The exit polls from Florida are going to be fascinating, and the implications of him winning are going to be huge. But you're in Georgia. What's going on there?
Stacey Abrams, I think she's up by 2 points, which means that she's not up. We're going to knock on doors. My friend Anoa Changa, she's really active here. We're going to knock on doors on Sunday for her, just because the turnout is so critical, especially when you have this Secretary of State running for governor who has the ability and is utilizing that ability to disenfranchise so many people, purging voters across the state, particularly in black counties. We're seeing it over and over again. The ACLU, we got a quick win this week. Well, not a quick, but an important win this week with the ACLU determining that individual poll workers cannot reject signatures, ballots, because they've made an individual call. And in the case that they do reject ballots, they have to contact the person. This was the craziest part about this, Sam, was that they could reject your ballot and not notify you. Now they have to notify you in this upcoming election. So there's some critical wins that the ACLU has been in the front of that are going to make the difference. But still, like, no one is even batting the eye that we have a Secretary of State, Republican, running for governor who's creating this situation in the first place. And everyone is still acting as though he's a good faith actor. And I guess I'm just not sure how those two things can coexist when you literally see him targeting communities of color in this race.
Is there anybody there talking about like, hey, this would be a good thing to do regardless of who wins, to reform this in some way? Like have the concept of recusal in certain instances or something to that effect?
I think it's going to take a Democrat doing this for them to actually say, OK, we want to put an end to this, because previously you've had other secretaries of state run for governor here in the state, and they generally have been Republican, if my memory serves me correctly. So no. But that kind of goes back to that questionable fecklessness that we occasionally see from Democrats, because that should be something that happens every, even if they're not in power. That has to be a war drum that they beat, because we go through this. Georgia has gone through this many times, apparently.
Do you have any sense that there's been a good enough job in talking about the voter suppression to drive votes? Like there have been occasions.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I notice it. So I do this thing now where I go to church now, which is different. But they're talking about it all the time in church. In churches, like I'm hearing it everywhere, in like the barbershops. So this is having the reverse effect. It's like, you want to take this from us, we're going to show up and make sure that you don't take it from us. So that's a net positive. But these are all anecdotes. Is it actually going to be a number significant enough to overcome the purge?